The project exists. The studies are progressing. Much of the railway's alignment has already been defined, but the train still doesn't run. Between the coast of São Paulo and the historically less integrated interior of the state, one of Brazil's most ambitious railway transport proposals is beginning to take shape. A corridor designed to connect regions, reorganize flows, and reposition rail transport in the country. But there's one factor that completely changes the picture. Despite structured studies, the proposal is still in the maintenance phase. And the part that draws the most attention, the possible connection to Curitiba, hasn't even gotten off the ground. What we have today is a project under development, divided between what is already concrete and what is still just a prospect. And that leads to an inevitable question. Are we facing a real project or an idea that still needs to prove itself? Stay with us. Stay for the next few minutes and understand why this railway could represent much more than just a new connection. The railway project proposed by Companhia Paulista de Trens Metropolitanos, CPTM, connects Baixada Santista to the Vale do Ribeira, close to Santos and passing through cities like São Vicente, Praia Grande, Mongaguá, Itanhaém, Peruíbe, Registro, and Cajati. Altogether, it's about 223.6 kilometers long, expected to serve 13 municipalities and have a direct impact on more than 1.5 million people. More than just a simple railway line, the route represents the revival of a historic corridor, a stretch that was once used but is now, for the most part, deactivated. And it's precisely this characteristic that defines the proposal. In addition to building a railway, it considers the reuse and modernization of existing structures, combining this with new railway sections. It's worth highlighting that the route fits into a broader logic, connecting the largest port in Brazil, one of the main ones in Latin America, to one of the least developed regions of the state. Even so, all these numbers in this proposal raise two questions. If this connection makes so much sense, at what point did this axis stop being a priority, and why? For decades, rail transport played a significant role in integrating the coast and the interior of São Paulo. The stretch that today makes up the Santos-Cajati route has already served different purposes, from cargo transportation to regional and tourist services. Over time, however, this network lost priority. The expansion of road transportation, combined with the lack of continuous investment in the railway network, pushed several stretches into abandonment and reshaped movement patterns across the state. It was in this process that the imbalance increased. While the Baixada Santista continued to strengthen under the economic influence of the Port of Santos, the Vale do Ribeira remained more isolated, with limited access to infrastructure, investment, and opportunities. Over the years, this disconnection turned into a logistical, social, and economic bottleneck, increasing costs, reducing efficiency, and deepening regional inequalities. And this made it clear that the problem was never just the absence of a railway. It was the absence of a model capable of balancing development across the region. It is in this context that the Santos-Cajati project emerges, not as a standalone idea, but as an attempt to rebuild a logic that has been abandoned over time. Because in the end, the problem was never the railway. It was the system that stopped using it. However, turning this diagnosis into actual construction requires more than just intention. So the question is inevitable. How was this initiative designed in practice? And what is actually planned to come off the drawing board? Unlike major projects that have already been contracted, the Santos-Cajati railway link is still in the functional design phase. The studies are expected to be completed by 2028. In practice, we are dealing with an initiative that is still maturing, with preliminary estimates, execution criteria, and definitions that still depend on technical depth, institutional validation, and future project structuring. This point is essential to understand the railway's current stage. The project is part of the SP on the Tracks program, a public policy aimed at reactivating and expanding São Paulo's railway infrastructure, with CPTM acting as the technical body structuring the project. From a conceptual point of view, the project fits into a hybrid proposal with a strong component of implementing new railway infrastructure, combined with the analysis and possible reuse of existing sections along the corridor. This approach allows, in some areas, to reduce the need for extensive expropriation, limit some of the environmental impacts, and optimize implementation when compared to a railway built entirely from scratch. But this does not make execution simple. The integration between new sections and possible reused segments means dealing with a corridor marked by deactivations, encroachments over time, and urban constraints, and physical limitations that need to be resolved to ensure safe operation. That's why the project follows technical guidelines based on the standards of the National Department of Transport Infrastructure, DNIT, bringing together studies of alignment, geology, geotechnics, hydrology, drainage, earthworks, and railway superstructure. In addition to the civil works component, the proposal also establishes important operational parameters. The railway should use a broad gauge of 1,600 mm with the capacity for medium-speed trains, reaching up to 160 km/h in certain sections. Compatible axle load was also considered, with freight operations paving the way for a mixed operation model in which passengers and goods share the same infrastructure. This design expands the logistical reach of the corridor and increases operational requirements. This includes operating windows, signaling crossings, ongoing track maintenance, and traffic control along the entire line. Another key point is the methodology used to define the route. The analytic hierarchy process method, also known as AHP, was used. It is a multi-criteria analysis tool that compares alternatives based on technical, environmental, operational, and economic factors. This brings more rationality to the choice because the decision no longer considers only the lowest immediate cost and starts to incorporate urban impact. In a project of this scale, the route is not just a line on the map. It defines the design, cost, implementation risk, and future possibility of expansion. It also anticipates conflicts with sensitive areas, urban crossings, and areas of greater construction complexity. Among the most critical elements are the so-called major structures, such as bridges, viaducts, and grade-separated crossings. Added to this are the implementation of passing sidings, telecommunications, signaling, and traffic control, which are essential to ensure safety, regularity, and efficiency in a corridor designed for multiple services. However, there is an element that makes the project even more complex: the possibility of extending the railway to Curitiba. This section, unlike the Santos-Cajati corridor, which combines new stretches with possible reuse of existing infrastructure, would be classified as grayfield. In other words, it would require building from scratch with new studies, new permits, and a higher level of technical, environmental, and financial challenges. Currently, this extension only appears as part of a long-term plan. What exists today, in concrete terms, is a well-defined project between Santos and Cajati. The rest remains in the realm of possibilities, and this difference needs to be made clear. To understand the scale of the Santos-Cajati railway project, it's necessary to turn technical numbers into real-world references. With about 223.6 kilometers long, this connection is practically equivalent to the road distance between the cities of Cuiabá and Rondonópolis in Mato Grosso. However, it's when we look at the investment that the scale of the initiative becomes even clearer. Preliminary estimates indicate a cost in the range of 19 billion to 21 billion Rs. In practical terms, for comparison, this amount would be enough to buy between 250,000 and 280,000 brand new economy cars, considering an average price of 75,000 Rs per unit. When taking into account the world of urban mobility, the comparison becomes even more striking. If we take as a reference complex sections of the urban subway, whose costs can reach close to 1 billion Rs per kilometer. As in the case of Line 4, the yellow line of the São Paulo Metro, This same amount could fund between 19 and 21 kilometers of subway. This is equivalent to approximately 18% of the 110.9 kilometers of railway lines in the metropolitan region of São Paulo. But there is an even more structural comparison. Today, the Brazilian railway network is about 29,000 kilometers long. This means that by itself, the Santos-Cajati project would represent something close to 1% of the entire national railway network. However, the most important comparison is in its function. A concentrated and saturated road transport model is phased out. At least in theory, the possibility of a more efficient, integrated railway system opens up. And that's exactly where scale stops being just geography and becomes a technical system. Once integrated into the model, the project has the potential to transform the region's logistics. By redistributing flows and reducing historical bottlenecks, the railway tends to improve predictability, reduce travel times, and increase transportation efficiency. This impact goes beyond mobility. It directly affects operational costs, the competitiveness of production chains, and the economic integration between regions. Furthermore, the corridor can fit into a broader logistics network, serving as a basis for future expansions, potentially including a link toward the south of the country. But it's essential to remain realistic. The railway alone does not solve the problem. The effect depends on the completion of studies, financial feasibility, connection with other modes of transport, and the effective implementation of the proposal. Without that, it remains a hollow solution. The project is designed. The logic makes sense. The potential is clear. However, for now, it still hasn't left the drawing board. The Santos-Cajati Railway represents an important step in the development of railway transportation in Brazil. At the same time, it reveals a bigger challenge, because in the end, this is not just the story of a railway. It's the story of a system that needs to start working again. Thank you for watching so far. Did you understand what's happening in this scenario? We have a railway from Santos to Cajati and possibly to Curitiba if all the other infrastructure ends up being built. But what do you think? Is it possible? Will we really see this railway from Santos to Curitiba? Leave your opinion in the comments. I'll stop here. Take care and see you in the next video.